Personal foul. 69. Offense. He was giving them the business. He played it there.
Welcome to IRA's Livestream 117, Giving Them the Business Part 3, in which I examine the propensity of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Satanists to look the other way when it comes to signs of corruption in the church. And foremost among those signs of corruption is the fact that there's an endemic sexual abuse problem. And so I want to highlight that by first examining some things, some allegations against President Rusty Nelson, which I'm going to talk about some things that are personal in this podcast in terms of how I became aware of a problem in what was then my church. And the first case that I ever took involving anything to do with Utah was the Bountiful case. That is the allegations against Dick and Brenda Miles. So a private client came to me through an intermediary, which is typical when I do investigative research on behalf of private clients. It's usually an attorney, an accountant, or a accountant, or a wealth management employee, someone who handles their affairs, who retains my services. And they want me to look into a particular subject area, and I do. And I've been making good money doing that for some time across two key areas. One is tracking pedophile networks, and the other one is fraud. That is money laundering or embezzlement, so on and so forth. One of the things that I'm really good at, largely because I think my brain works differently as an autistic person, is recognizing patterns and vast sums of data. And also, socially, in order to avoid being hassled as a kid, I observed how things worked in terms of peer interactions in terms of adults. So I just observed, and I formulated rules for dealing with people because what I was doing wasn't working. And it took a long time of trial and error and observation to accrue enough data points to formulate rules for human interaction. If that sounds odd, it's because it is. Most of us, I guess it's intuitive, but to me it didn't come easy. And the things that I observed that translated to the work that I did in terms of investigative research were as follows. People group together according to their values and interests, and they also group together by their geography. Now, the internet has complicated that analysis quite a bit because the internet has removed distance and proximity as an issue for social interaction. But at the time, in the early 2000s when I started this, I was good with Google before Google was a thing. I was good at using the internet to find information about people. And as more and more information came online in terms of court records, property records, so on and so forth, you didn't actually have to go to a county courthouse to look those records up. They were digitized, they were put online. Over time, that made my job a lot more convenient. But the same basic principles applied. People group together by their values and their interest and geography. And much of the geographical component stems from two locations. That is your residence, that is your home, and the place of your employment, that is your job. And so most people only go to about 4 to 6 places regularly. The exceptions to this are when they visit people in their past or their family that lives in a different geographical area or location. People will deviate from their routine for that. But that deviation tends to be quite regular and consistent in terms of holidays, vacations, so on and so forth. It is more or less a part of their routine. It just isn't as frequent a part of their routine. So, values and interests, geographical proximity. A route along 2 points, that is your house and your job. And of course, as a Latter-day Saint, we all know this to be true because we are grouped by our address into wards and stakes. And as a result, there is an order and a routine to our personal connections and to our habits and routine. And when someone deviates from that, it is usually quite significant, especially in the context of sex crimes or a conspiracy to commit sex crimes. I didn't get emotional about pedophiles. I just looked at it like you would look at a bowling league or a golf tournament or, any number of other human activities. If that strikes you as disturbing, sorry, that's just how my mind works. I don't like pedophiles. I was raped as a kid, like sexually abused, object raped, and it wasn't fun. I didn't know that it was sexual at the time, and later when I found out what sex was, I was quite apoplectic. And so, eventually what happened was I was retained by private clients to look into an abuser of a child, and that kind of kick-started everything for me in terms of that particular subject area. The thing that I understood quite quickly about pedophiles, because I treated them like any other group of humans who were grouping according to their values and interests, is that they had their own peculiar quirks, and they had their own language, their own vernacular. They had their own symbols. They had their own culture, basically. And consequently, because I wasn't emotional, I was just, kind of objective and analytical about it, I was able to accrue the expertise that led me at some point to the individual who retained me to look into Dick and Brenda Miles. Now, the things that stood out about this project was that the individual was adamant that I used none of my own hardware, none of my own software, nothing, and that it all be boxed up and sent to that individual at a later date. And upon achievement of the objectives, whatever or whenever he was tired of paying for things, if the objective was not achieved. And sometimes the objective isn't achieved in this work. Sometimes the answers that they're looking for aren't there. And so I proceeded along the path of something that I was not familiar with. I didn't know who Dick and Brenda Miles were prior to that. I knew who Russell M. Nelson was because he was a prophet of my church. And I assume, like most Latter-day Saints, that men who rise to that level of authority and power are properly vetted. That the reason they're so old when they're called as an apostle or in Area 70 or a general authority is because they've been tested, tried, and found competent to handle the authority that is vested in them before they're called to that position. So, with Russell, I assume the same thing. The issue with Russell M. Nelson, both in the course of that project, and I have to kind of dance around here because I did sign an NDA, is that I found a document that was incontrovertible proof that Russell M. Nelson knew about the allegations against his son-in-law Dick Miles and his daughter Brenda, and used his position as a newly minted apostle to cover those allegations up and to deter both the church and local law enforcement from continuing to investigate further. So he basically quashed all consequences for his daughter and his son-in-law. And that document also provided ample insight into the fact that Rusty, as I call him now, knew that the allegations had some merit. They were truthful. The Dick and Brenda Miles were absolutely guilty of what they were accused of. They did what they were accused of. Bill Karstensen, the father of the girls who initially reported the abuse, the touching parties, as they were called, at Dick and Brenda Miles' house, was also giving his daughter or his daughters marriage lessons. One of those daughters had significant injuries that required medical intervention at a later date. Bill Karstensen and his wife split up. He married a second woman. And then years later, after the fact, her children came forward, including her biological children with him and her stepchildren, to say that Bill Karstensen had been molesting them. That's the price of a cover-up. Additional victims. At the conclusion of the project, and it's one of the great regrets of my life, is that I did agree to an NDA that was binding, and that all of the information that I found and all the documentation that I found were the property of the client, including a document that absolutely incontrovertibly established that Rusty covered up sexual abuse allegations against his daughter. Later on, Justin Riggs found communication or documentation of communications between the church and a D.C. law firm pertaining to this case, advising Rusty on how to proceed and advising the church on how to proceed with respect to these allegations. The long and the short of it is in the aftermath of his exposure for molesting a second group of kids other than the kids from his first marriage, Bill Karstensen purportedly committed suicide. He overdosed on pills because he was facing legal culpability for what he did. He did so at his mom's house upon returning from Arizona to face the music. He was diagnosed at Johns Hopkins as a pedophile. He did confess to the abuse that he was alleged to have committed. So he acknowledged what he was. It was documented that he was a pedophile, that he was attracted to children, that he did act on that attraction. And the fact that he was later accused of the same thing by the children from his second marriage speaks for itself. And so Rusty covered up the abuse. He removed culpability from his daughter-in-law, or his daughter, Brenda, and his son-in-law, Dick Miles, who have served missions for the church abroad, who remain members in good standing. And of course, as these things happen, one of the issues here is that a lot of Latter-day Saints are part of what I like to call the Ostrich Club. They want to pretend that there isn't a problem in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because ultimately, if they did acknowledge the existence of a problem, they would potentially be sacrificing their priesthood position, and their lives would be made difficult by other members of their ward and their stake. And so, just like victims, they would be stigmatized and ostracized, and they're not willing to do it because they genuinely believe that their place in the celestial kingdom will be affected by any disciplinary action that they face at the hands of the Church of Latter-day Satanists and its leadership, who are all in one way or another exposed to this kind of misconduct, because many of them have directly participated in it. And so I have resisted any kind of effort or any kind of discussion about this in the past, primarily because it wasn't the Hamlet case. And also, from a tactical standpoint, it would impede my ability to uncover the full extent of what happened in the Hamlet case, because I would be alienating Latter Day Saints who I might need as sources. Well, the time has come for that to change. My wife, on her Substack for Relentless Hope, published an article naming ritual abusers, including Russell M. Nelson. And I want to be very clear. I don't know of allegations specifically about ritual abuse pertaining to Russell M. Nelson. What I do know are allegations of plain old sexual assault. And those allegations have one thing in common. In the late 80s to 90s, like early 90s, which is where many of the allegations that I have personally looked at, the victims have personally named and given that timeline, late 80s, early 90s. Russell M. Nelson was an elderly man then. And like a lot of other elderly men, he struggled with erectile dysfunction during his attempts to abuse children and teenagers. And when he would have an episode of ED during these episodes of abuse, the universal description here, the universal retelling of the abuse by victims, is that he would become angry and sadistic. He'd become violent when he couldn't perform sexually. So I've taken to calling Rusty President Limp Dick. Because ultimately, one of the things that I believe about abusers is that they don't deserve any kind of dignity or respect. They're pieces of shit. And I have carried that around with me for some time. I carried around the idea that I'm not going to talk about Rusty in any great detail publicly because it might impede my ability to reach people about the topic of ritual abuse and the topic of endemic sexual abuse within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, that ends today because I've given them the business, and part of giving them the business is I believe sunlight and mockery are the best disinfectants to this scourge. At the time that I started looking into the Hamlet case, I was also looking into allegations that were brought to me by a woman named Cynthia Metcalf, who later became my wife. She was the founder and executive director of an organization called Relentless Hope, which I have since taken over as executive director. Relentless Hope provided services like free counseling and so on and so forth to ritual abuse victims, but it also had an investigative component in its initial iteration, which I have since shut down because I believe it ultimately Relentless Hope isn't set up to be an investigative organization. It's set up to be an organization that provides services to survivors of ritual abuse and sex trafficking within a ritual abuse context. So the general model is we provide 10 free sessions of counseling, and if the money is there, we continue with any survivor who's willing to go to therapy. Usually the average session is about $150 a pop. If you want to donate to Relentless Hope, you can do so at relentlesshopeforyou.org. I would highly encourage that because no staff member takes a salary or any type of financial benefit whatsoever. We're all volunteers from yours truly on down from the executive director, the people who run the survivor support meetings. The only people who get paid are the therapist. And at the end of the day, Cindy made a deal with me. She had about 36 victims in a cluster, and several of them were connected to the Hamlin case through allegations against David Levitt, the former Utah County attorney. One of them was in the old statute of limitations for a civil suit. She was still a minor. And I was excited because this individual personally witnessed David Levitt engaging in criminal sexual behavior and even homicide. And the deal was I would have to look at all of the victims within that cluster of victims that Cindy Metcalf brought to me. I would have to interview with them. I would have to look into their allegations in order to access the victims that overlapped with the Hamlin case. It seemed like a fair trade-off to me, and I proceeded to start looking at those victims and then looking at even more victims who named current members at the time. This was around 2022, 2023, of the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency as their abusers. Now, I'm not a fan of MK Ultra, high-level Nazi program, and all the other shit that comes with ritual abuse. I'm a skeptic. I look at ritual abuse in the context of, if you rape someone, it's a crime. I don't care about the satanic mumbo-jumbo or the lurid details of it. At the end of the day, if you rape or murder somebody, those are crimes. And I was trying to build, as I have done in the past, evidence for criminal and civil suits to break the LDS Church of Satan and to expose it. And that proved far more difficult than I originally anticipated. It's 4 years and nobody's been convicted of anything. What I have become aware of is in the state of Utah, talking about this is a greater crime than actually raping and murdering anybody in this context. Talking about it is the crime. It's the crime that will get you barred from church property, which happened to Jason and Alexia Preston. Meanwhile, I'm unaware of any perpetrator of child sexual abuse who received a similar letter from the church security office barring them from church-owned property. And so President Limp Dick, Rusty Nelson here, as I got more and more into these allegations, the thing that his alleged victims repeatedly talked about was his erectile dysfunction and how it made their abuse worse. How Rusty became sadistic and violent out of his frustration over his erectile dysfunction. Multiple victims talked about this. Not just one or two, over a dozen. I already didn't sustain Rusty as a prophet, seer, and revelator, even as an active Latter Day Saint, because I knew about the allegations with Dick and Brenda Miles and his role in covering those allegations up. It affected my faith tremendously. I wrote multiple letters and multiple reports that were passed up internally. I told numerous other Latter Day Saints about what I had uncovered. To their credit, they didn't ostracize me. They didn't stigmatize me. They believed me. It is unfortunate that the, smoking gun document is something that I don't have possession of. It was an original. It was not a copy or a facsimile or anything. It was an original that someone had held on to for close to 30 years. I don't know why they held on to it, but when I obtained it, I almost fell out of my chair. Like, you talk about having a hot potato in your hand. It was the document that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Russell M. Nelson's exposure in the abuse allegations against his daughter Brenda and his son-in-law Dick Miles. The bountiful sex party, touching party allegations, they're true. That happened. Like, I can say that to you 100%. That actually happened. What those children were alleging, those Karstensen children were alleging, is valid. It's true. I've seen the evidence myself. It's true. And Justin Riggs has done excellent follow-up work on this because he could. I'm talking about it at a risk of possible legal exposure because it did sign a non-disclosure agreement, but fuck it. Rusty is rotting in hell right now for what he did to cover up sexual abuse. And he didn't just do it to the Karstensen children and later Karstensen's children from his second marriage. He did it institutionally throughout his career. The majority of the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency have covered up rampant sexual abuse allegations involving children over the course of their careers. That is part and parcel of being a member of the Latter Day Satanists. And I say that not to denigrate rank and file Latter Day Saints who actually follow the rules of the club that they're in. They actually adhere to the law of chastity. They actually adhere to the word of wisdom. They walk the talk. They practice what they preach. Whatever cliche you want to throw out there, they're good people. A lot of them are outside the state of Utah. A lot of people in the state of Utah are fucked up. Like, it's the only... They're swingers. They're pornography addicts, if that's what you want to call it. I just tend to look at it as a personal choice. If you choose to fuck somebody other than your wife, you're an adulterer. If you choose to watch that shit on the internet and invest your time in watching porn, watching another man have sex with a woman or whatever porn it is that floats your boat, and you devote your time to that as opposed to your wife and kids, you're a piece of shit, a sexual deviant, and an adulterer. Like, that's just absolutely black and white. And you're also potentially gay, because if you want to watch another man get it on with a woman, well, it is what it is. You'd rather watch another man have sex than have sex yourself, even though it's available to you in terms of your marriage. And you're choosing to invest your time in that. So, a staggering number of other people that I've become aware of have the same issue. I've interviewed a woman who said that her husband's job was to go out and buy hardcore pornography for the brethren, assemble it into a reel, so that they could be abreast of the latest and greatest trends in hardcore pornography, ostensibly so that the brethren, the Quorum of the 12, could watch this and know how to counsel bishops and stake presidents who are dealing with members who were having a problem with pornography. Why they would need to invest church funds in the purchase of hardcore pornography in the 80s and 90s and pay someone to construct clips of that into reels that they could then watch to be aware of what was going on in the world of hardcore pornography, there's no innocent explanation for this. It's fucked up. It's inappropriate. And it's just wrong. You're not supposed to watch that in any context for any reason. And if you do, it's a sin. There is no context in which that will ever be permitted. especially not for an endowed member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or a member of the Quorum of the 12 of the First Presidency. You don't need to research pornography to oppose it. You don't need to know what the trends are in pornography. Like, the absolute standard here is you're not supposed to watch it. You're supposed to devote your time, and you know where your priorities are as a human being, as a husband and father, by how you spend your time. And your time is not your own, it's God's. And God has instructed you to invest it in your wife and your children and your community, not in sitting around watching another man get his groove on with a porno actress or with another man or whatever the hell it is. It will never be acceptable. It's not the only story like that I'm aware of. But over time, from 22 onward until the death of Melvin Russell Ballard, I had dozens of allegations against every member of the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency, excepting Dieter Uchtdorf. And that made me think really highly of Dieter. It made me think really, I was sad and devastated for the church that I was a part of. And the issue was I wasn't looking at those allegations to substantiate them with the same fervor that I was looking at allegations in the Hamlet case, because I tend to have tunnel vision about those allegations. And so I didn't devote my time or energy to those allegations the way that I should have. And consequently, I turned away a lot of victims who wanted to come forward to IRA because their stories, their allegations didn't have any direct connection to the Hamlet case. What I can say to you absolutely 100% today is I know that Russell M. Nelson was a ritual abuser. I know that he was a sexual abuser. As I said earlier, a staggering number of the allegations against him, they don't involve ritual abuse. They just involve him having children brought to church buildings so that he could molest them. Period. There are people in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, like that man who made porn reels for the brethren, whose job it is to procure and bring children to members of the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency. I've heard that story over and over and over and over and over again. There is no innocent explanation for the church's propensity to cover up sexual abuse allegations or to discourage people from reporting those allegations to the police. That is an institutional policy. It begins at the top and it seeps down to the rank and file. It seeps down to bishops, it seeps down to stake presidents, many of whom are good people, and they want to do the right thing. And they face incredible pressure from the leadership of the church to not do the right thing, which is to turn over sexual predators to the police. And they face that pressure because many of the leaders of the church are themselves abusers. Period. It isn't my story to tell unless I'm authorized to tell it by a victim. But what I would tell victims is, if you are serious about exposing this, I'll take your story. I'll do an interview with you. And I will try to substantiate your allegations the way I pursued the Hamlet case over the past 4 years. And you can reach me at Goel at investigationsandritualabuse.com. This has to stop. And I don't care who these men are or what their position or their rank is. This has to stop. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not going to reform itself. It's not going to change or make any substantive effort at reform because the men at the top are involved in this kind of abuse. Straight up. I haven't been sued for defamation in the Hamlin case. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is the allegations are true. The allegations against those people in those victim statements are true. You have a taped apology from David Lee Hamlin to his daughter for raping her, in which he says, "I am sorry for raping you." That is, you could take that to any jury and secure a conviction. Combined with all of the other evidence, including losing his license for sexually preying upon his patients, he admitted to doing it with 2 patients. There are more. There are plenty of patients that Doppel did not interview. That is the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing, which oversees professional occupations that require a license in the state of Utah. There are plenty of other victims of David Lee Hamlin in a therapeutic setting that he had sexual contact with, and he admitted it to Doppel. He also recently put up a video in which he talked about having sex with his patients in therapy, and he said that it worked for some of them and it didn't work for others. You don't fucking say. At some point, you have to look at the culture that produced David Lee Hamlin, whose father, Robert Lee Hamlin, is also an alleged ritual abuser and an alleged member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints. He's been part of stake presidencies. He's been a temple worker down in Mesa, Arizona. He and his wife, they were active ritual abusers, according to the evidence that I've uncovered, in Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, and Arizona, and Utah. There are definitive allegations against them. Mary June Adams Hamlin, Robert Lee Hamlin's first wife, operated a system of preschools. She operated a network of preschools in Arizona that gave her access to children. That's not an accident. She and Robert Lee Hamlin worked at the University of Washington in St. Louis with children as part of their studies. He was a doctor of sociology, and he conducted experiments involving children during his time at Washington University in St. Louis. He was the chair of the sociology department until he was forced to step down in the aftermath of outrage over a man named Laud Humphrey's dissertation, in which Laud Humphreys used false pretenses. He posed as a watch queen, as it was called, so that gay men could go into the bathrooms of public establishments and have sex. He was the lookout, basically. And in the aftermath of that, he procured the license plates of those men so that he could identify them and locate them. He did not disclose that he was a researcher doing research for his dissertation. And, of course, those men gave him what he wanted because they were worried about blackmail. He violated any number of ethical standards in the research that he did for his dissertation, which he later compiled into a book. And he later came out as a gay man. Big surprise there. In the aftermath of his dissertation, which was defended and approved and awarded to him, the president of St. Louis was outraged, or the president of Washington University of St. Louis was outraged. He wanted to look into potentially retroactively revoking Laud Humphrey's PhD based on the ethical violations that were committed, and also because Laud Humphrey's PhD was researched and written at a time in which there was a tremendous amount of social stigma with homosexual behavior. And Robert Lee Hamlin as an endowed member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, oversaw the department in which that research occurred, in which those ethical violations occurred. And so after he left Washington University in St. Louis, he moved to the University of Arizona, where he chaired and built their sociology department. At the end of the day, he stands accused, Robert Lee Hamlin stands accused by his granddaughters of being an abuser who trained his sons, David and Stephen, in ritual sexual abuse. David Lee Hamlin got his doctorate from the University of Arizona. He did his clinical work, that is, his field work, as it were, in New York. He lived in Port Chester, but he operated out of the Cornell University Medical Center Westchester Division. That was his base. He gave therapy at a different location, and one of his clients in New York was a man named Gordon Bowen, who would later figure prominently in the Church of Satan as a member of the High Council of the Church of Satan out of Salt Lake. He would be the punisher for the entire CS. That was what he was represented and held out as by David Lee Hamlin and his ex-wife, Roselle Stevenson, to their daughters, Rachel, Eliza, Catherine, and Miriam. He was said to be in charge of discipline for the entire Church of Satan. And of course, the Church of Satan, the reason it existed, the reason it was allowed to grow within the church, is because the leadership wasn't going to deal with such an internal problem at the risk of the church's image. That's my professional opinion as someone who spent 4 years on this. It is what it is. And of course, the fact that many of the leaders of the church are involved in sexual abuse and committing sexual abuse probably is why sexual abuse isn't dealt with in the church, because many of the leaders, many of the men who rise up the ranks, are engaged in sexual abuse in one form or another, including Rusty Nelson, President Limp Dick, as I call him. And at the end of the day, the majority of saints prefer to maintain their membership in the Ostrich Club. They prefer to look the other way, to go along to get along, because they believe that their eternal salvation and their status as an exalted God or a ministering angel depends on their compliance with the Lord's anointed. I want to be very clear to you. People who commit sexual abuse and rape are not anointed by the Lord, unless that Lord is Lucifer. And the church sold out a long fucking time ago. The church's leaders were compromised a long time ago. If you want my opinion, my educated and informed opinion after 4 years of work on this originates with the church in the late 1830s, early 1840s, with polygamy, plural marriage, or spiritual wifery, or any number of other things that you might call it. Call it what it is, perversion. Monogamy has always been the standard. It's the standard in Jacob 2. It says that just because David and Solomon practiced plural marriage, they practiced polygamy, doesn't give the Nephites an excuse to practice it. And if that's the standard, there's no excuse for it later. Monogamy has always been the standard from Genesis 2 on, and it will always be the standard. And the examples of plural marriage or polygamy that occur in the Old Testament also are accompanied by the consequences of polygamy, which includes sibling rape and murder and civil unrest. It destroys marriages, it destroys lives, and it destroys families. And of course, our modern day polygamists and the so called fundamentalist Latter day Saints, the different sects that have arisen from the Apostolic United Brethren to the Kingston group on, they fuck their own kids. Okay? They practice incest. They force their children to marry their half siblings. That's the caliber of person who wants polygamy to be restored as the rule of the day within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. Whether it's Jacob Hansen or Brian Hills or anybody else, you're a piece of shit. And you're sitting here and perverting the Word of God, the Scriptures, to enable your perversion. This has nothing to do with raising a seed up to the Lord. It has to do with bludgeoning your wife into compliance with you bringing another wife into the equation. That's what it has to do with. And of course, it leads to other sexual perversion. I'm aware of a cluster of cases in Arizona that involve Mormon fathers who were incestuously abusing their daughters. And the justification for that was a Brigham Young teaching. A lot of saints don't realize that Brigham Young taught that Jesus Christ was a product of physical intercourse between Heavenly Father and his daughter, Mary. That's how Jesus Christ was conceived. In this teaching, it obliterates Jesus' status as the Messiah, because according to Isaiah 7:14, a sign will be given, a virgin shall be with child. If it's an ordinary carnal birth, there's nothing significant about it, there's nothing miraculous about it, it's not a fucking sign. It's very clear in Isaiah 9 that that child will be, wonderful counsel, mighty God. That incarnate child will be God incarnate in the flesh. And so, Brigham Young teaching that Jesus was not born of a virgin basically obliterates his status as the Messiah. It obliterates his status as an incarnate God. Christ isn't Christ in that teaching. Brigham Young was a blasphemer, a heretic, and a deeply corrupt man. He was not a prophet. He was not a seer. He was not a revelator. He was a pervert who wanted to accrue material wealth, and he used the church to do it. A lot of saints don't realize that at most 28% of saints practice plural marriage, because mathematically it was impossible for every saint to enter into plural marriage. Plural marriage was hypergamic. What I mean by that is higher-ranking men in the priesthood could solicit your wife to leave you and enter into a marriage with them. And those women were susceptible or open to that idea or that proposition because their place in the eternal celestial kingdom depended on whose wife they were. So the higher ranking your husband was in the priesthood, the greater your position in the celestial kingdom would be. This is about rank. It was about hierarchy. It was about any number of things that don't really come into play in any authentic version of what heaven is. It's an earthly concern that doesn't translate into your position in heaven. At the end of the day, it should be enough to you that you will be in the presence of God, which is what you are built to be. Your bodies are supposed to be a temple of the living God. That's why sexual immorality is bad, because it's the one sin that occurs inside of the body. All other sins in the Corinthians occur outside of the body, but sexual immorality, fornication, occurs inside of the body. And that's why it's bad, because it defeats the purpose of the body, which is to be indwelled by a living God, a Holy Spirit. And sin alienates you from that God, especially when you are truly in Christ. Part of the discipline part of the consequence is that your communion with God is disrupted. You can only have real communion with God when you are in obedience to Him. And those who endorse non-monogamous relationships or relationships outside of wedlock, sexual conduct outside of wedlock, who make exceptions for this and then blasphemously condition that on one's eternal salvation or one's rank in heaven, they are liars, they are servants of the devil. And they should be dealt with that way. At the end of the day, polygamy is not of God. It is of the devil. And the consequences of polygamy in every instance where it is practiced are disastrous for wives, disastrous for children. And we see that in the Kingston Group. We see that in the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints. We see that in the Apostolic United Brethren. I have heard gut-wrenching stories of sexual abuse from people who have escaped those cults. And the fact that the Utah legislature has basically decriminalized polygamy is part of the fucking problem. They did so because, we don't want to break up families. You mean families where men have children that they can't afford and their wives are encouraged to engage in welfare fraud so that their kids can have something to eat because they're such sacks of shit that they won't provide for those wives and those children? You mean that? You mean that type of family? You mean the type of family where a father gives his daughter marriage lessons by having sex with her and forcing her to sexually pleasure him so she'll be ready for her future husband, who is very often her half-sibling? You mean that type of family? Fuck that type of family. That's not a family at all. Like it says in Corinthians, provide for your children and your family. Even the heathens do this. So if you don't, you're a piece of shit, biblically speaking. So you should be providing for your family. You should be working and earning and providing for that family, not shoving them off onto state or federal welfare rolls for their health care and their food. Like it's that simple. The men who engage in this obscenity that is polygamy, that is plural marriage, do so as abusers and perverts. They're not men at all. And the men who endorse the historical validity of polygamy miss the point, just as those who argue over whether polygamy originated with Joseph Smith or Brigham Young miss the point. The point is, polygamy is always wrong. It doesn't matter who started it. It didn't matter in Jacob 2 if it was David or Solomon or Saul or anybody else. It was never a justification for the Nephites to engage in it, and it was never a justification for modern-day men to engage in it. And if you think otherwise, well, you're in contradiction with the Book of Mormon, and you're in contradiction with the Bible. The standard has always been monogamy. It says in Deuteronomy, the king shall be the husband of one wife. It's that simple. And you're not a king. You're an ordinary person. If that's the standard for a king in the Old Testament, it's the standard for you. The consequences for anyone who has questioned the historical narrative of polygamy, which is sexual abuse, it's not rooted in consent. It's rooted in one person, a husband, a priesthood holder, bludgeoning his wife into compliance with it. The consequences for any dissident on this topic, like Michelle Brady Stone, who had a YouTube channel called 132 Problems, the consequences have been severe. She has been called before her priesthood authorities, and I say that loosely because these aren't men. These are people who have no connection to God whatsoever. If they did, they would know these things. If they had any still small voice inside of them that was actually connected to God, they would know that polygamy is an abomination, and they don't. And so you have people making irrelevant arguments like Jacob Hansen and Brian Hells and Christopher Blythe and all these other men who obviously hope that polygamy, plural marriage, will be restored by the church sometime in the near future, because they hope to be the kind of men who have multiple wives to raise up seed for the Lord. And really, polygamy is about sex. It's always been about sex. It was about sex for King David. It was about sex for King Solomon. It's been about sex for every man who's ever entered into it. And it hasn't been about love. It hasn't been about intimacy. It hasn't been about obedience to God. That's bullshit. It's been about sex. And the current leadership of the church has enabled this by not speaking with clarification or any type of moral clarity on this, that polygamy is never coming back. Not as an ordinance blessed by God. It will come back because the devil directs the affairs of the Church of Latter Day Satanists. It will come back as a result of that. Any wife whose husband is looking at pornography or having affairs, put your husband away. It's adultery. It's the one exception that is a justification for divorce. And that includes if your husband is molesting your children, your daughters. Get out. Leave. Because he's not going to reform. He's not going to repent. He's not going to stop. Pedophiles don't reform. They don't rehabilitate. Rapists don't rehabilitate or reform. They don't repent. They have rejected the truth of God, and they should be treated as such. And you need to decamp from the ostrich club, because the consequences of your children are going to be enormous. Some of your children are going to grow up because this behavior has been normalized to them, and they're going to tolerate their husbands molesting your grandchildren. Your sons are going to grow up to be the type of men who see that you didn't take a stand against this, and they're going to think it's normal to do to their children and their wives. And if you choose to remain in the ostrich club, you are a sack of shit. Like, there's no exception to this. There's no context in which this is excusable. There's no context in which abusing another human being sexually, overriding their consent for your own sexual gratification, there's no context in which this rape is excusable, and the devil did not make you do it. You made you do it. And so as we get into what the church is doing and where it's headed, I want you to look at this off of Twitter. And I want you to realize biological females in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are having to wait outside the restroom because of guidance issued from church leadership, so that trans men, that is, men who think that they're women because they're mentally ill, have access to the women's restroom. And their bishops can't say anything about them presenting as female. That's actual guidance from the leadership of the church. The Bible's very clear in Leviticus 18 through 20. A man shall not wear that which pertaineth to a woman. So that's simple. A man is a man, and a woman is a woman. There are two sexes, two genders that are connected to biological sex. It's a biological female and a biological male, and you have certain conditions that are extremely rare, certain chromosomal abnormalities like Klinefelter syndrome, in which chromosomes are disrupted. Those are extremely rare, and they're not present in a majority, the overwhelming majority, of trans men and trans women. So there is no biological basis for this. This is a mental and spiritual condition. And I want to use this tweet to illustrate to you the level of absolute depravity that the church is sanctioning and normalizing and saying to biological female Latter Day Saints, you have to wait outside the restroom so that a dude can take a dump in the women's restroom because he's mentally ill and he believes that he's a transgender woman. So, this is Evie Goes Hard on Twitter. Just got back from Planned Parenthood. Received abortion medication. Doctor assured me that it was okay. As a trans woman, finding sources of euphoria can be hard. Having my abortion gave me so much joy and hope for the future. I love my aborted baby. That's who biological female Latter-day Saints have to wait outside the restroom for. That's what the church is sanctioning and normalizing. That level of delusion. That's what's fucking going on. So if you think that there's some sort of prophetic discernment or spiritual insight being exercised by your priesthood leaders, I got news for you. That thing can access a women's restroom, and you, as a biological female Latter-day Saint, have to wait outside while they're in the restroom. That's the guidance that was issued to wards and stakes to bishops. And the bishops can't say anything about Evie here dressing as a woman, because she's not a woman. He's not a woman. And these trans people are pushing this to the they're pushing it to a logically absurd conclusion. They're going to Planned Parenthood. They can't conceive a child. They don't have a uterus or fallopian tubes. They don't menstruate. And they're getting abortion medication because at most they're imitating women who are having abortions. And they believe that this is part of being a woman. So Evie here went to Planned Parenthood, got some abortion pills, ingested them, and believed that that was tantamount to an abortion. She loves her aborted baby. The fucking cognitive dissonance here is stunning. And the fact that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints leadership issued guidance that tolerates this in any way, shape, fashion, or form is your sign that this isn't real. They don't have any discernment. They don't have any connection to God whatsoever. A spade is a spade. That is a man. And a man can't have a child or conceive a child, can't have a pregnancy. Therefore, he can't have an abortion. And the fact that Evie here thinks that he had an abortion by taking some pills that he got from Planned Parenthood is a further sign of just how mentally ill trans people are. Just how sick I love my aborted baby. That's what the church is sanctioning when it lets trans people be members. It lets trans people use the restroom that corresponds to their gender identity. There is no such thing. You're either biologically a man or biologically a woman. And it's not compassion that's driving this. Okay, the compassionate thing to do would be to refer Evie here to a psychiatrist that doesn't mince words. It says you have gender dysphoria. You have a serious medical condition. And you are deluded into thinking that you're a female trapped in a male's body. That's a compassionate thing to do here. It's also the factual thing to do. Because Evie isn't a woman. Evie is a man. And Evie didn't have an abortion. Evie took some abortion pills that Evie got from Planned Parenthood, and he, in his impersonation of a biological female, genuinely believes that having an abortion makes him a woman. So he's finding sources of euphoria by imitating a woman who's having an abortion. And having his abortion gave him so much joy and hope for the future. I love my aborted baby. There's so much to unpack here, and the fact that the church is sanctioning this kind of shit at all is unbelievable. So, as I sit here and I talk about the fact that abuse has gone up the ladder to the point where the church leadership, 14 out of 15 before M. Russell Ballard passed, had allegations of ritual abuse or sexual abuse against them. In that context, this makes perfect sense. In that context, this all makes perfect sense. The fact that Charlie Bird can be a gay man who's married to another gay man and have active church callings, even though his entire lifestyle contradicts the church's core doctrines on marriage and the family, and he clearly isn't repentant of his sin, his sexual sin. He's engaged in a mock marriage. It will never be a real marriage. It will never be a valid marriage. In a real marriage, and this is going to upset a lot of heterosexual people too, because they don't like this component of marriage. In a real, authentic marriage, not one of those marriages sanctioned by the state with a piece of paper. In a real, authentic marriage, it's a man and a woman, and the third person involved is God. And that man and that woman are committed to raising a family after God's plan. There's only one type of marriage, and it's that type. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't believe that, and that's why we have a divorce rate. Over half of marriages end in divorce. It's because they don't have the value connection to sustain a real marriage. And most are imitating marriage. They get a piece of paper, and a marriage is not a piece of paper. A marriage is a sacrament. It's a covenant between a man, a woman, and God. And so, ultimately, if I look at where the church is headed, and the fact that in San Francisco there was a member of a bishopric who was a gay man, openly gay, who had previously been married to a woman. If I sit here and look at all of that, I just sit there and say to myself, the church has fallen. The church has lapsed. It's in apostasy, plainly and simply. And when I look at the trend of the church, I say to myself, all of this is connected to the fact that the people at the top are satanic. They are engaged in open apostasy, and that's reflected in the evolving policies and guidance around LGBTQ or LMNOP. Or there's so many fucking acronyms that these people come up with that I can't even keep track. I just call it LMNOP now because it's absurd. You're not a lesbian, you're not gay, you're not bisexual, you're not transgender, you're not intersex, you're not queer, you're not any of that shit. You're a human being created in God's image, and God has a plan for you. He believed that you were, valuable enough that he sacrificed himself in the form of his son for your salvation, for you to have a path back to him in a fallen world. That's how much he valued you. That's how much he treasured you. He gave you a path back to him, a path of redemption, a path that was permanent. And it's very clear that the leadership of this church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has rejected that path and that plan. And they tell you to trust the living prophet, and they try to use church disciplinary processes to intimidate you or cow you. They lie about their history. And if their history was true, they wouldn't need to lie about it. And they have these irrelevant arguments over who created the moral abomination that is polygamy, plural marriage, whether it was Joseph Smith or Brigham Young, as though that has any relevance whatsoever. It's whoredom, according to the Book of Mormon. And later on, who created polygamy is irrelevant. It is always whoredom. It always has a deleterious effect. It's not found in Genesis 2:26. It's not found in Deuteronomy, which explicitly says a king shall have one wife. It's not found in any of that. Oh, but there was a revelation. No, there wasn't. God doesn't contradict himself. God doesn't establish one standard of marriage by creating Adam and Eve, only to, in the 1830s or 1840s, obliterate that standard of marriage in order to create a different standard in the form of plural marriage. Monogamy is the only scriptural and morally valid version of marriage that there ever will be, and it's always in the context of God. It's always in the context of a covenant with God. You and your wife, husband and wife, covenant with God in obedience to him to structure their lives and their marriage according to God's values and God's purpose for their lives, and they commit to raising their children in a biblically grounded and founded household. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. You're full of shit. Secular marriage is an oxymoron. If you're not willing to enter into a covenant with God as part of your marriage, if you're not willing to sublimate your entire life to him in obedience to him, you don't need to get married. Because your marriage is just not going to work. Like, you're not going to treat your wife the way that she should be treated. She's not going to treat you the way that you should be treated. You're not going to model yourselves after Christ and the church, which is the example, the template that's given in 1 Corinthians, where husbands are to love their wives and give themselves for their wives and their families the way that Christ gave himself for the church, and wives are to honor and obey their husband who does those things, who models himself after Christ. They are to honor and obey him the way the church is supposed to obey and honor Christ. And what I would say to you is most churches don't do that. And the reason our society and our culture is so fucked up is because we don't acknowledge the obvious and we don't obey it. It's that simple. There is a reason we have dysfunction in our society, in our culture, not just in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, but across all churches. They all claim the name of Christ, but they don't follow after him. And so what I would say to you is the dysfunction has real consequences. It has people like Evie here in this tweet, who is a man who has deluded himself and who has been deluded into believing that he can be a woman and he can have an abortion, and he loves his aborted baby. Like, the fact that this is even a thing in secular society is stunning to me. It shows how far we've come in terms of abandoning logic and reason. And we've exchanged the truth for delusion. And people like Evie are being ratified. They're being supported and affirmed in what is a deep mental illness, in a deeply spiritual condition. I've had a lot of LMNOP friends over the course of my life, and without exception, all of them were horrifically abused. They didn't have an example in their parents. They didn't have an example of a mother and father who were committed to God and committed to Christ. They had a mother and father who paid lip service to this, and every single ritual abuser that I've encountered over the past 4 years, they all attribute themselves in some way, fashion, or form to God, and their children grow up to be adults who believe that the abuse that they suffered is the fault of God, as opposed to the fault of their abusers. And they don't know their ass from their elbow when it comes to genuine Christianity, because the people who abused them were professing Christians. And consequently, those kids are permanently alienated from God in most cases, because they assign the abuse that was inflicted on them to God. Because guess what? The person who abused me was a Christian. They were an endowed member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, and the Lord's anointed are supposed to have this extra special, crispy, spiritual discernment that enables them to ferret out what's what. And that is the biggest crock of shit, and we know it because of the outcomes here. We know that that's a bunch of bullshit, because these men don't demonstrate spiritual discernment in any shape, fashion, or form, because their so-called policies don't conform with Scripture. Their so-called policies, they're just making it up as they go along. They don't have any discernment. They don't have anything whatsoever in the way of discernment or discretion that enables them to identify people who are truly committed to Christ. And that's why they restored someone like Wade Christofferson to membership. They rebaptized him. They restored his temple recommends. They removed the notation from his membership records for child sexual abuse, and basically gave him a series of callings from his rebaptism on that put him in proximity to children. I mean, this man was a member of a stake Sunday school presidency. He was a member of a bishopric in a YSA ward. The church put that man in a position of authority and access over children. And they did so using their so-called apostolic, prophetic, spiritual discernment that Wade Christofferson was healed, that he was reformed, and he was restored to the gospel. And of course, we all know now that that is the biggest crock of shit ever. It required an area representative to remove the notation from his record for earlier child sexual abuse. Did that area representative have discernment came from God? Or was he just making it up as he went along? For a little feel-good story for a guy who was the brother of an up-and-coming church authority named D. Todd Christofferson, who's now a member of the first presidency of the church, and who incredibly wants us all to believe that he didn't know about his brother's proclivities and his propensity for child rape and child sexual abuse until 2020. He had no idea that his brother had been excommunicated, or why his brother had been excommunicated, because, you know, he was a good member of the fucking Ostrich Club. And it didn't profit him in his rise up the church ranks to look at what his brother was doing. Look at what his brother was. He's a member of the Ostrich Club, and there are a lot of Latter-day Saints who are part of this club who stick their fucking head in the ground and look the other way when it comes to child sexual abuse, when it comes to inappropriate behavior, and when it comes to the clearly unscriptural guidance and policies that are being issued out of their leadership in Salt Lake. Like, I want to be very clear about this. 14 out of 15, before M. Russell Ballard died, 14 out of 15 had dozens of allegations of ritual and non-ritual sexual abuse against them. I personally interviewed many of those victims. I looked at their allegations and their files as part of my work at Relentless Hope. And those victims can't all be lying. Can't all be lying. They're telling the truth. The reason the Church of Satan has been so successful over the years in the infiltration of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is run by men who engage in sexual abuse, who engage in sexual impropriety. When you see someone like Garrett Walter Gong, whose son Matthew Gong is a self-described queer, polyamorous Mormon, as though those things can coexist, you have to look at Garrett Walter Gong's parenting. When you realize that Garrett Walter Gong socializes with a man like Gordon Bowen, who was excommunicated for sexual impropriety, that was part of the reason he was excommunicated in 2003. Garrett Walter Gong visits, he calls upon Gordon Bowen socially at his home in Holiday. The church holds events at that home, rents it out. Gordon Bowen is present at some of those events. Gordon Bowen talks with members of the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency. He is being retained as the creative director of the temple reopening, the Salt Lake Temple reopening in 2027. There's no innocent explanation for that. There's no innocent explanation for why the church chose Gordon Bowen to preside over a multi-episode film about Jesus Christ, and they gave him they gave him the ability to oversee a budget of a reported $20 million to produce this film. And the film's never seen the light of day because it was improper, it was inappropriate, and the people who have seen it, who have told me about it, almost unanimously say that they just didn't feel that it was of the Holy Spirit. And they tried to salvage some of the footage into something workable or usable, and they were unable to. What did they expect? Gordon Bowen had allegations of pedophilia and child sexual abuse dating back to the early 2000s. His homosexuality was an open secret in Mormon circles as early as the early 80s. Everybody knew what he was. This is a guy who enlisted his co-workers at Bonneville Communications to spend the night with him at his house because he believed he was being assaulted by evil spirits. He clearly is mentally ill. And yet Bonneville Communications continued to employ him. They continued to indulge a man who was clearly unhinged and unbalanced until they fired him. And the story goes that he waited outside of Bonneville Communications offices to the point where they had to station someone at the front door as a security officer because he just stood across the street waiting for certain people to come out so he could accost them. This is a man who's told multiple people about his criminal acts in Chicago, up to and including an alleged homicide. He was open about this. He was open with his friends that he liked working at the VD clinic at the University of Utah with men who were suffering from venereal diseases. Like, as you do. And that's who the church directs its business to. That's who the church retains to oversee the reopening of the Salt Lake Temple. And Justin Riggs is kind of leading the charge in terms of getting the church to change that. But as I've researched that story, Gordon has kind of appointed himself, and the church leadership has been quiet about this. He's appointed himself as the creative director. The actual agency that is overseeing it is a contractor by the name of Struck, as one source has said that to me. Gordon apparently sexually harassed another member of the church's creative team during the production of that film on Jesus Christ. I'm working on reaching out to that individual. But the fact of the matter is, Gordon Bowen has been excommunicated for over 23 years now. And he was excommunicated in part because of child sexual abuse allegations, because of his hiring of gay male escorts that he said were being retained to give him massages. Most of us would just go to a spa and get a professional masseuse to give us a massage, but Gordon made thousands of calls to these male escort services while he was married. He is a gay man. It's that simple. And he's an unrepentant gay man. He's never made any effort to be rebaptized or renew his membership in the church. Because at the end of the day, he is a sexual deviant with multiple allegations of child sexual abuse against him, and the church continues to retain him for its business. Church authorities like Garrett Walter Gong continue to socialize with Gordon Bowen. Garrett Walter Gong, as I understand it, goes to Gordon's home to play pickleball, of all things. And so when you see that Garrett Walter Gong's mother, Jean Feng Char, was listed in the obituaries of the DeYoung sisters, who are allegedly members of the Church of Satan, as their sister by affection, and she lived with Garrett Walter Gong Jr. and his then teenage daughter Karma DeYoung. She traveled abroad with them. By her own admission, this is a story that strains credulity. When she arrived at BYU's campus to register for classes, she was informed that a scholarship had been funded in her name. Now ask yourself why a Chinese American living in Hawaii, a girl who was the only member of her family to convert when the missionaries came, a girl who was sent to California by her father precisely because her father hoped to isolate her from a church that he disagreed with. She found her way up to Burlingame, to a Scottish Rite temple where the ward was meeting, and it was there that she met Nola and Clyde Sullivan. Nola's maiden name was Nola DeYoung, and that was the basis of her lifelong relationship with the DeYoung family. And all three DeYoung sisters, who are alleged to have participated in some of the most egregious crimes against children and the most satanic abuse you can imagine, all three of those DeYoung sisters list Jean Feng Char, Garrett Walter Gong's mother, as their sister by affection in their obituaries. And Garrett Walter Gong is now a member of the Quorum of the 12. His son, Matthew, identifies as a queer, polyamorous Latter Day Saint. As though those things can actually coexist. That's the level. You should be looking at Garrett Walter Gong very closely in terms of how his son turned out. You should be asking yourself, since gays don't reproduce and nobody is born that way, what the hell happened to Matthew Gong? And where was Garrett Walter Gong when it was happening? You should be looking at that for every Latter-day Saint family that produces a gay child, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There is one way that gay men reproduce, and it is by molesting a child during their formative years and coloring that child's perception of what is normal and acceptable in sexual relationships. They rape kids. It's that simple. I'm not saying that every gay man rapes kids, but I am saying that every gay man I've ever known was sexually abused as a child, and often physically abused as well, because they were compelled by older gay men, physically and violently, to submit to sexual abuse. They were coerced into that sexual abuse, and later on they identify as gay. It's that simple. And the same thing with the lesbians. Many of them were horrifically physically abused by a man, either as a child or as an adult in a relationship. And that's the reason they're lesbians, is because they were physically and sexually abused by a man who was evil, a man whose behavior is unacceptable and inexcusable and sinful. And so consequently, their sexual attraction gravitated towards someone of the same sex. And guess what? Domestic violence is endemic in lesbian relationships. It's tragic. I have a sister who's mentally ill, who identifies as lesbian. She's sitting in a mental hospital right now because yesterday she called me, and in the course of a conversation with her, while I was trying to find her a hotel, because she's been homeless for months, and I just found out about it. I Ubered her from the hospital that she was discharged from because she's poor and she's uninsured. So I got her an Uber to a Walmart, and I told her to sit tight, and I tried to find her a hotel in Lakeland, Florida on a Friday, which apparently hotels in Lakeland, Florida fill up quite fast on Fridays. She didn't get to the homeless shelter in time to get a bed. So she was turned away there, so I Ubered her from that shelter to a Walmart to find her a hotel. And I told her to sit tight and wait, eat and drink. She was talking about how she didn't want to be here anymore. And you know what the issue here is? She was physically abused by my dad. We all were. I love my dad, but he was wrong to do what he did. And consequently, as a result of the extreme physical and mental and emotional abuse that my sister suffered, and the fact that she was raped in a parking lot as an adult, she eventually, through the dysfunction and misconduct of men, identified herself as a lesbian. And she started to pursue relationships with women because every relationship she'd ever had with a man, beginning with my father, was rooted in abuse and disrespect and egregious misconduct. Her first husband, her only husband that I'm aware of, was cruising the mall in Mobile, Alabama, looking for other men to have sex with. And when my gay male friends realized who her husband was, they said it was a joke. He was known in the gay community. He couldn't pick up anybody because nobody would have sex with him because he was a creep. And this is coming from gay men whose entire culture revolves around cruising and non-monogamous relationship, and they found him disgusting. Like, think about that. Reprobate-minded men wouldn't hook up with that man. He was my sister's husband. He was abusive to her, like physically. I bounced him off of a concrete sidewalk because he pulled a knife on my sister in my presence while she was recovering from knee surgery. So I picked him up, and I made sure that his head and his body hit every surface, every doorway on the way out. And a lot of people might have a problem with that. I don't give a shit. If you pull a knife on my sister in front of me, I'm going to do some shit. Any normal human being with any normal impulse would do the same to any man who abused a woman in his presence or who threatened a woman in his presence. And the problem with Latter-day Saint men is that they don't have that instinct because they've been neutered by a church that doesn't promote a model of healthy masculinity where men defend women and their children. Instead, these little cuckolded men run to their priesthood holder, their bishop, and their bishop tells them, oh, you got to tell your daughter to forgive her perpetrator who never fucking asked for forgiveness. When you think about how fucked up things are in that equation, think about it from a standpoint of a leadership being involved in sexual abuse and issuing policy and guidance to their bishops and their stake presidents. If they want to rise up the ladder, they're going to play ball. And the consequence is your daughter, your niece, your nephew, their abuse has to be suppressed for the good of the church. They have to forgive their abuser who didn't ask for forgiveness, who made no effort at contrition whatsoever in the way of compensation, and offer to pay for any sort of counseling. They just gave that kid a lifetime sentence of trauma and abuse. And by the way, when that kid grows up to be gay or a lesbian, it's directly related to their fucking abuse. So fuck you if that's what you're okay with. And when you look at D. Todd Christofferson, one of his brothers is a pedophile and a child abuser, a child rapist, and the other one is a gay man. That's not accidental. That's not incidental. And it's not incidental or coincidental that Brenda Miles is married to a man who is forcing children, allegedly, to drink urine and feces-laced Kool-Aid as part of these touching parties that Brenda Miles allegedly filmed. No woman who's raised by an actual man, a Christian man, is going to participate in those types of activities. No woman whose father is an actual father is going to be susceptible to that kind of behavior. You know what she's going to do? She's going to call her dad, and she's going to say, Dad, I need to get the fuck out of this marriage. My husband is engaged in unimaginably atrocious behavior. He's trying to get me to film kids being forced to drink piss and eat shit while those kids are being molested. And I'm not okay with this, and I need you to come get me and your grandchildren and get the fuck out of this. That's the normal thing that would happen in a Christian father's relationship with his daughter. And the fact that she was amenable to that kind of behavior and conduct on the part of her husband, and she was participating in it, there's your sign that all was not well in Rusty Nelson's household and in the upbringing that he gave his children. There are rumors that Rusty's other daughter, who died, alleged sexual abuse, but there's nothing concrete about it. Like, the reality of it is, anybody who does have evidence or documentation of Rusty's misconduct is welcome to contact me at Goel at investigationsandritualabuse.com. Goel at investigationsandritualabuse.com. That's where you can send me tips and evidence. At the end of the day, the reason these things are happening in the church, the reason Charlie Bird, a married gay man, former Cosmo the Cooter at BYU, is able to hold a church calling, is because the church is in apostasy. The church is normalizing sexual sin. The church is inching forward towards the acceptance of that sexual sin. And why not? It already tolerates swingers and people who view pornography and any number of other things pertaining to child rape and child sexual abuse. It already does that because through the magical power of the Mormon priesthood, you can heal a pedophile. And of course, time and time again, that theory has been debunked conclusively. Because guess what? Wade Christofferson, he was rebaptized, his temple recommends was restored, and the notation in his membership file was reduced or removed. with the permission of an area representative he had to interview with. That area representative didn't have any insight or spiritual discernment to know that Wade was healed, because he clearly wasn't, because he went on to abuse multiple other children. And so this bullshit idea that these men have any sort of spiritual discernment whatsoever, that's been trashed by the results of their so-called spiritual discernment as it pertains to pedophiles and sexual abusers, child predators. Because time and time again, these men continue to be recidivists. They continue, after they're rebaptized and after the temple recommends are restored, and they're supposedly healed and they've repented and turned away from this, and they go right back to it as soon as they have the opportunity. And that is discrediting to the church's leadership. It's discrediting of their policies. It's discrediting of their guidance to bishops and stake presidencies. It also creates additional victims, because these children who get abused after all of this is supposedly fixed, they have no one to blame but their so-called priesthood holders, who have zero connection to God and zero spiritual discernment and zero prophetic power. They don't hold the priesthood. There's nothing special about them. They're perfectly fucking ordinary. They're frauds. And the reason you know that is because they can't tell that a pedophile is still a pedophile. That a child rapist is just going to keep raping children, because that's what they do. And they're only going to stop when they die. That's the only reason Rusty Nelson doesn't have additional victims. He's fucking dead. Because even when he was a limp dick loser in the 80s and 90s, and he couldn't get it up to abuse his victims, no matter how much he was trying to make them suck him off or get him aroused, even then, he was still abusing children. He was still forcing them to perform sexual acts on him. So fuck Rusty. And fuck anybody who says he's a prophet, seer, and revelator of God. The Church of Latter Day Satanists is real, and the CS is not an isolated little sect operating covertly within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's taken over. And the men at the top, if they aren't involved in sexual abuse, they are complicit in the cover-up and the concealment of sexual abuse, and they're complicit in additional child victims being created as a result of their so-called discernment. And I am tired of pretending like it's any other way. I'm tired of being diplomatic about it. Like, at the end of the day, I have watched as Jason and Alexia Preston, who do not abuse anybody, have been barred from church property for the next year at least. And their return to church property is conditioned on them undergoing counseling and possible medication at the recommendation of their so-called priesthood leaders, because they dared to report this. They dared to give victims a voice on their platform. But meanwhile, Wade Christofferson hasn't been barred from church property. He hasn't received one of those letters. Neither have any of the other countless members of the church who have been credibly accused, and in some cases convicted of sexual abuse. Peyton Bussey wasn't barred from church property, even though as like a 13-year-old kid, he was convicted of sexually molesting two younger boys, like 6-year-olds, at a swim event. And guess what? Peyton Bussey, he was ordained into the Melchizedek priesthood. He had a temple recommends. He's a member in good standing. All the while, he was sexually abusing his own nephew. like in his parents' home and elsewhere. He was sexually abusing his nephew. He was sexually abusing his niece. He was allegedly sexually abusing other children in Washington State. He has both federal and state level criminal prosecutions pending against him. He has federal level prosecutions against him because he had child sexual abuse material in his possession. He has a victim in Washington State that he's being prosecuted for abusing, and he has his nephew in Utah that he's being prosecuted for abusing. And his parents, his dad is Phil Bussey. Guess where they sent Payton after his teenage conviction? They sent him to Wasatch Academy, the same private school that alleged members of the Church of Satan were sending their kids at. The private school that has on its faculty an alleged member of the Church of Satan and an alleged participant in child sexual abuse, Alyssa Wolf. She's in the Hamlin victim statements. Mike, it's that simple. You think it's a coincidence that the Bussey sent their adopted son, Payton Bussey, to that school after he was convicted of abusing two kids as a teenager? You think that's a fucking coincidence? You think it's an accident? You think it's an accident that his mother was born and raised in Mount Pleasant, which is the same little area in Sanpete County that George W. Johansson, another member of the Church of Satan and a former stake president, lived in. I've interviewed George Wilford Johansson's victim. I've also accessed the court and criminal records related to his conviction for sexually abusing that woman. I've also looked at his extended family, and I found that his nephew is a convicted sex offender for crimes against children. So get the fuck out of here with these corroborative coincidences telling me that, oh, this doesn't really happen. It's just satanic panic. It's a conspiracy theory. Get the fuck out of here. These victims are not going to be denied their voice or their exposure. And if the church doesn't want to fucking get in line, and if you want to, as a Latter-day Saint, be involved in the Ostrich Club as opposed to being part of the solution to this, to eradicating the scourge from your church, you are a piece of shit. And you're complicit in a criminal cover-up. And if you're still taking your kids to churches, to the church, to your ward, to your stake, and you're allowing adults to access your children in an institution that clearly doesn't do enough to protect children, then guess what? You're exposing your children to the risk of being sexual abuse victims themselves, and you are a sack of shit. You're not qualified to call yourself a real parent. So that's simple. And a lot of people don't like the language that I'm using. I don't really give a fuck. Like, I don't care. Like, I want to highlight that to you. I don't give a shit anymore. I really don't. I'm facing another round in this stalking case. For people I've never met, like, I've never interacted with them outside of a comment underneath of one of their restacks of my Substack content. I don't have anything to do with them. Never really interacted with them outside of court. But supposedly, I stalked them by writing about these allegations in the Hamlin victim statements. Like, I stalked them. They're scared of me. They're emotionally distraught. Because I wrote about these allegations and I publicized these allegations to a wider audience. Like, that's the level in Utah. I paid $1,000 fine as one part of this. They're asking for another $1,000. They're asking for 5 days of jail time because this individual came to my Facebook profile and he restacked a post that I had made, or he had reposted a post, like an article. And he said he didn't realize it was my profile. And the fact that my fucking name was at the top of the post, I mean, that's the biggest crock of shit ever. But that's what the state of Utah is. That's what it is for victims. That's, so my situation pales in comparison to the stories of abuse, and I'm grateful for that. I thank God every day that isn't my life, that I wasn't ritually abused. So every little hardship that I undergo, every little inconvenience, it's nothing. This is a cause that I'm committed to. And if I have to go to jail or pay fines for journalism in the state of Utah as a result of the Podunk 6th District of Manti, then so fucking be it. God has a plan. And that plan involves me staying the course no matter what the consequences are. And if I have to do more jail time for journalism than David Lee Hamlin has done for raping his daughter, or raping Emily Sheets, or raping any of the other people that he raped and sexually abused, so be it. Like, this is the whole thing. They can only have the effect on you that you allow them to have. So as I sit here in this state and I say to myself, oh, what terrible consequences will befall me next? Like, the reality of it is, there are no terrible consequences for me. Nothing that compares to the multiple married women that I've spoken to who were institutionalized in psych wards because they brought forth allegations of abuse against their husbands or other male figures. So their bishop and their stake presidency drove them to hospitals, often under false pretenses that they're going to help them, and had them pink slipped into those mental institutions. Imagine that. Imagine reporting sexual abuse and your bishop and your stake presidency is complicit in the cover-up to the point of discrediting you as crazy. They have you admitted into a psych hospital. That's what these people are facing in this fucking state. That's what's going on with the full endorsement of priesthood holders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints. That's one of the tools that they use to intimidate people into silence. Well, you're not going to intimidate me into silence. I have a big fucking mouth. And I can back it up. So try me. Try me on this. I have an absolutely unbelievable distaste for pedophiles and rapists, and for anyone who would sexually abuse another human being, or anyone who'd physically abuse another human being. Because one of the things that 25 years of dealing with abusers professionally has taught me, in addition to the 18 years of abuse that I endured in my parents' household, taught me, like, that's 43 years of my 48 years worth of existence. The thing that it's taught me is that it only works if you break, if you knuckle under to it. Well, I just never did. You could beat me all day. It's not going to make a dent. Like, I knew I was going to be 18 one day and I was going to be out of my parents' house. And when that time came, nobody was going to be putting their fucking hands on me again. I always knew that there was an expiration date for that kind of treatment. And that one day I'd be an adult and I'd be free of it. And I didn't break. Like, I didn't collapse under the weight of this. I got out. And what I would tell every victim, every survivor out there, the people who did this to you, they're bitches. They're cowards. You don't have to take it. I know it seems like an entire state, entire church is against you, and they are. But persistence is what's going to break this open. Persistence, sunlight, and mockery. Those are the disinfectants to this. And for those of you who are part of the Ostrich Club who have looked the other way or for whatever reason or purpose, like you have chosen to stay on the sidelines of this, it is millstone season. You can either be an accessory after the fact that these individuals, even if you haven't abused someone yourself, if you're complicit in supporting a church that uses your tithing revenues to build a war chest of resources and assets that are used to suppress allegations of sexual abuse, truthful allegations of sexual abuse, and to cover it up, you're part of the fucking issue. This church has nothing to do with God. Those who cover up rape are just as guilty as the people who commit rape. This church has nothing to do with Christ. It has nothing to do with God. And you know it because they don't insist on accountability for sexual predators. Their reasoning for doing so is fucking irrelevant. At the end of the day, it's unacceptable. And the fact that they have treated victims so poorly demonstrates conclusively that the inspiration for their actions, it originates and it is grounded in the adversary. That's the Lord that they serve, Lucifer. They serve secret codes and combinations, and they have overtaken this church from the inside, and they have perverted it against its purpose. Like, they have gone against God. They are spitting in the face of God, and that's why they're losing fucking members. That's why there's 17 million members. There's maybe 4 million that are actually active. And even less than that, pay tithes and get a temple recommends, because priestcraft ultimately doesn't work. And selling tickets to a prayer wheel or selling tickets to the temple in the form of tithing doesn't work with most people. Like, at some point, people wake up to the smell of bullshit, and they call it what it is, bullshit. You don't have any special priesthood power or spiritual discernment that enables you to ferret out abusers. Because if you did, you'd be expelling those abusers once and for all. You wouldn't be rebaptizing them. You wouldn't be readmitting them in a community. You would tell them that they have rejected the truth of God in order to abuse the most vulnerable members of your population, the people who your church is going to be dependent upon to carry it into the future, to carry the gospel in the future, that is children. And if you're not going to protect children, then you aren't worth shit. And if you're going to neuter your own male members into this artificial, fucked up masculinity where they defer to priesthood holders of a higher rank instead of reporting their child's abuse to the authorities, instead of going and beating the shit out of the person who abused their child or the persons who abused their child, like, that's the conditioning you're offering your male members. No wonder their wives don't respect them. No wonder their children grow up to be alienated from them. Because they're not men. They're not respectable. Like, as a father, if you touch my daughter, you think I'm calling the police? I will go to Texas where she is located. I will fucking kill you. And that's why my daughter doesn't have to worry about that. Because I might not be the best dad on the planet, but I do know right from wrong. And I do stand up for my daughter's safety and security. That's my job as a father. And so does her stepfather, and so does her grandfather. So does her grandmother. She has parents in her life and an extended family support network that ensures that anyone who would ever lay a finger on her inappropriately is going to pay for it. And that's the greatest deterrent. I've played footage on prior episodes of IRA in which a pedophile who's being interviewed says that if he perceived the father as a threat, he didn't target that particular kid. Well, the reason pedophiles are so fucking bold in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints or the Church of Latter Day Satanists is because the fathers aren't a threat. The fathers are cuckolds for priesthood power and authority. And they go along to get along. Because they want exaltation. They want to put their temple recommends at risk. That would have an impact. That would have eternal consequences. And your kid can take a little sexual abuse. It's all part of God's plan. It's all part of Heavenly Father's plan. All these little difficulties and obstacles, you just need to forgive your perpetrator. And the problem is, by forgiving your perpetrator and forgetting and moving on and not reporting him to the authorities, he's just going to rape other kids. And there's no part of that has anything to do with Heavenly Father's plan. Like, Heavenly Father has given us civil authorities for a reason. He's given us laws for a reason. But if you don't enforce those laws, then get the fuck out of here. They're just going to keep doing it. And if you don't believe me, look at Wade Christopherson. Look at any number of abusers who have been rebaptized and readmitted into the church with full rights and privileges. Temple recommends even. Only to rape more kids. Like Floodlit has dozens of examples of this. Hundreds of examples, actually. And throughout the history of the church since the 1980s on, there have been plenty of other organizations founded by active Mormons and even ex-Mormons who were excommunicated or disfellowshipped for speaking truth to power about this particular issue. And they have chronicled hundreds of instances where priesthood holders like active Latter-day Saints covered up sexual abuse. So, in closing, I want to present one more example here. So, on my screen is an excerpt from an article. I got this in part because of Justin Riggs of LDS Abuse. I think it was on his Twitter feed. And Justin Riggs, who does great work, highly recommend that you follow him on Twitter. He excerpted this article. The plaintiff points out that the LDS Church has explicit written policies directing leaders to, quote, report the abuse to civil authorities, and stating that, quote, abuse cannot be tolerated in any form. Well, that might be your official internal policy, but that's not your practice. The LDS Church's authorities dismiss these internal rules entirely. They argue that having a policy against abuse does not mean that the LDS Church has undertaken a legal duty to actually enforce it. In a dizzying display of legal acrobatics, the LDS Church warns the court that holding them accountable for failing to follow their own anti-abuse policies would, quote, punish those organizations for trying to stop abuse that they have no legal duty to stop. The message appears to be clear. The LDS Church's policies exist as public relations ideals, not actionable commitments to the safety of its most vulnerable members. Couldn't say it better myself. It's window dressing. The explicit written policies that direct leaders to report the abuse to civil authorities, those are never followed, in my experience. It's very rare that a bishop reports abuse disclosures to the police. Instead, he calls the hotline. And the hotline is run by the church's law firm, Kurt McConkie. May they all burn in hell for all of the sexual abuse and impropriety that they have covered up. And Kurt McConkie tells them, we don't have a legal duty to report the abuse. Therefore, we shouldn't. In fact, in practice, bishops discourage victims and their families from reporting the abuse. They tell them that they have a duty to forgive, that that's the Christ-like thing to do. Well, the Christ I follow used a bullwhip and kicked over tables in the temple because there were moneylenders and other apostates in his father's house who were turning his father's house into a place of merchandise, to a place of commerce, and it was inappropriate. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints currently sells access to temples, the Father's house, to members who pay 10% or more. As long as you pay that 10%, you have a temple recommends, and you can go do those ordinances that have an eternal effect on your rank in the celestial kingdom. It's priestcraft. It's what the Book of Mormon calls priestcraft. God's ordinances are free through the grace of Jesus Christ. God's grace is free through Jesus Christ. You can never earn it. You can never buy it. You can never buy anything that grows out of it, like an ordinance. You can never deserve it. It's not for sale. Salvation is not for sale. Grace is not for sale. And if you need any further clear illustration of why the church is not true, this excerpt, this text, should prove it to you. The church doesn't have a legal duty to report abuse. It has a moral obligation to report abuse to civil authorities, which are established by God to be terrors to evil works, not to good. In the state of Utah, the authorities are a terror to good works. They're just as corrupt. Consequently, you have a man like Colton Johansson, an officer of the Ogden Police Department. He's a school resource officer. He was undergoing a polygraph for a lateral career move, and he wasn't doing so well on that polygraph, so the examiner shut the polygraph down and asked him what the problem was. Colton Johansson admitted that when he was 24 in 1994, he had sexually abused an infant. He also admitted to having child sexual abuse materials stored in the garage of his private residence, material that he had obtained as a result of his membership in a sex crimes task force, and God knows how many prosecutions he endangered by having that material in his private residence, as opposed to an evidence locker at the police precinct, because he broke the chain of custody with that material. And any decent defense attorney would file a motion to challenge the admissibility of that evidence in their client's trial. So, good job, Colton. Not only did you illegally possess child sexual abuse material, which you incredibly insisted that you didn't view for your own sexual gratification, even as someone who admitted to raping an infant 30 years ago. You also said that you went through that material in order to procure the material that portrayed adults engaged in pornographic behavior, as though that makes it better. You also endangered the convictions and the prosecutions of other men who had that material that is evidence in their trials, their cases. because you broke the chain of custody with that evidence. And incredibly, in the state of Utah, the judge in Colton Johansson's case, I mean, it's an open and shut slam dunk case. He illegally possesses child sexual abuse material. There's strict liability with that. It's a crime to possess it outside of the context of a criminal investigation, and there is no context in which he should have that in his private residence, or he should be admitted to pleasuring himself with that material in his garage. And against the backdrop of his admitted sexual abuse of an infant, his explanation strains credulity. So, Judge Catherine Conklin said that Johansson was a decorated law enforcement veteran and not a danger to the community. What he admitted to is bad enough, but if you think that's all he did, I got some lakefront property in the Everglades to sell you as like prime real estate. Cole Johansson and others like him think that we're fucking stupid, and they think that the courts in Utah are stupid, and the courts in Utah are not stupid. They're fucking corrupt. It's that simple. There is no innocent explanation for why Judge Thomas Lowe would refer to a former bishop named Keith Robert Vallejo at his sentencing hearing after he had been convicted of sexually abusing 2 females. Why Judge Lowe would refer to Keith Robert Vallejo at his sentencing hearing after he was convicted in the presence of his victims as, quote, an extraordinarily good man. There's no innocent explanation for that. It's a deliberate effort on the part of Judge Thomas Lowe to downplay the severity of what Keith Robert Vallejo did. It's also an effort to normalize it on some level. Oh, he's just an extraordinarily good man who raped 2 women. Extraordinarily good men don't rape. They don't abuse. Pieces of shit, like immoral, amoral pieces of shit, do that behavior. And if you wonder why Utah's so fucked up and so corrupt, look no further than the church's arguments in this little excerpt. They don't have a legal duty to enforce their internal policies, which direct their leaders very clearly to report the abuse to civil authorities. By the way, their law firm through the hotline is telling their leaders not to report the abuse allegations. So yes, abuse can be tolerated. That's the practical effect here. And yeah, you may not have a legal duty because of the priest penitent privilege and so on and so forth in the state of Utah, which should be abolished. But has it been abolished because you direct the legislature not to abolish it? You have a moral duty. It's very clear that the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints don't have any fear of God whatsoever. And why should they? They've been doing this with impunity for decades. And they're not afraid of their membership. They've got $250 billion. They do not give a fuck about you. They will drown you in litigation if you fight them. If you sue them, they have an army of attorneys. And by the way, they won't even have to expend their own money. Their insurers will do that for them. And they'll just keep getting richer and richer and more powerful. And the abusers that they shield will continue to evade any serious consequences. The extraordinarily good men who rape women and children. Like, that's the fucking cultural norm here. The audacity that a sitting judge could refer to a rapist in front of his victim as an extraordinarily good man. That's what the church has enabled. And they're not worried about consequences. And why should they be? Most of you are in the ostrich club. Most of you watching this aren't going to do anything. You might watch this podcast, but you're not going to do anything. You're not going to organize and mobilize. You're not going to challenge the church when you go to church. You're not going to go to the general conference and raise hell. You're not going to do anything of substance to fix this. And here's the thing. The victims are watching you. Your children are watching you. And everything you do normalizes this further and cements it further. And what I'm telling you is, when I say it's millstone season, I mean accountability. I mean political accountability. You got to vote out all your elected officials. You got to send a message to Salt Lake. Fuck your temple recommends. These men don't have any influence over your eternal destination. If there's a celestial kingdom, you won't be in it if you tolerate and you go along to get along where sexual abuse is concerned. Period. No amount of temple access is going to fix the moral abomination that comes from tolerating sexual abuse and its cover-up by your leadership. And any priesthood holder who participates in the cover-up of sexual sin, especially as it pertains to rape of either adults or children, isn't a holder of the priesthood at all. They're an impersonator. They're a poser. You should have no respect for them whatsoever. This is a good stopping point, I think. I am Goel of Investigations of Ritual Abuse. If you have any tips or documentation for me pertaining to sexual abuse allegations, inside or outside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, I want to know about it. I will do my best to give you my time, effort, and attention to your allegations. I am one man, but I do want to know. Goel at investigationsandritualabuse.com. And there are others like Justin Riggs of LDS Abuse that you can contact on Twitter, at LDS Abuse on Twitter. You can also contact Jason Alexia Preston of We Are the People Utah. We are kind of the lone voices in the wilderness. You can contact Floodlit about this if you have documentation. Charlie does excellent work. There are more and more of us over time that are picking this up, and I think the tide is turning. But it is going to take a while for it to fully turn. It's going to take determination. It's going to take people turning in their membership card in the Ostrich Club and calling a spade a spade. The Lord's anointed. They're not anointed by God. They might be anointed by Lucifer, but they're not anointed by God. This is Goel of Investigations of Ritual Abuse, and I'll leave you with a clip that we opened with. Giving them the business.
Personal file, 69, offense. He was giving them the business. He played it there.